Imagine coming home from the hospital, fighting for your life, only to find your home ransacked. The people you trusted most, your own family, had stolen everything, thinking you were already dead. But here's the twist. When the final chapter of her life was written, this sweet old lady made sure the last laugh was hers. And her greedy relatives? They were left with exactly what they deserved. If you've ever dreamed of serving cold, delicious justice to someone who betrayed you, hit that like button, subscribe, and settle in. Today's story is the ultimate tale of family betrayal and $9 million karma. Our story begins in a quiet little town, in a humble apartment filled with sunlight and the faint scent of lavender polish. This was the home of Margaret, a 76-year-old retired nurse. She wasn't wealthy, at least that's what everyone thought. She lived alone, never married, never had children. Her world was small, but full of warmth. Sunday church services, chatting with neighbors, tending to her little windowsill herb garden. But what made Margaret's home special were her treasures. Delicate crystal glasses that sparkled like frozen rain, polished silverware that glowed under the light, antique furniture lovingly preserved from her parents' home. These weren't just things. They were her history. Her parents' dining table where she'd once sat as a girl. Her mother's china, only used on holidays. The little writing desk where she'd penned thank you letters to patients' families. Then, one quiet Sunday, life turned upside down. Margaret collapsed in her kitchen. Her neighbor, Mrs. Powell, heard the crash and rushed in, calling an ambulance. Margaret had suffered a heart attack. For 2 long weeks, she lay in the hospital, drifting in and out of consciousness, surrounded by the beeping of machines and the distant chatter of nurses. And that's when her niece and nephew, we'll call them Debbie and Carl, showed up. Now, Margaret wasn't especially close with them. They visited on holidays, sometimes called on her birthday, always with a polite distance. But the moment they heard heart attack, they smelled opportunity. They whispered to neighbors, "We're just helping Aunt Margaret, in case she doesn't make it." And help themselves, they did. Neighbors watched as Debbie and Carl marched in and out of Margaret's apartment with boxes and furniture. Her crystal, her silverware, even her favorite armchair, gone. When Margaret finally returned home, weak but alive, she opened the door to a nightmare of emptiness. No dishes in the cupboards, no chairs to sit on. Her family photos scattered on the floor, frames missing. She stood in the middle of the room, her hands trembling. Her heart didn't just ache from recovery, it broke from betrayal. When she called her niece and nephew, they denied everything. "We don't know what you're talking about, Aunt Margaret," Debbie cooed over the phone. Carl laughed. "Maybe you're just confused after the hospital." But the neighbors, the neighbors, had seen it all. For weeks, Margaret felt powerless. Imagine giving your life to helping others, nursing strangers through their darkest moments, only to have your own blood treat you like you were already dead. She could have called the police, but she didn't. She wasn't confrontational, and deep down, a cold, patient seed was planting itself in her heart. Karma takes time, but it always arrives. Life moved on. Margaret quietly replaced her dishes and a few pieces of furniture. She kept going to church. She kept smiling. But she also called her lawyer. Because here's what nobody in her family knew.
Margaret had invested quietly for decades. Retirement funds, some real estate, a little inheritance from her parents. Slowly, carefully, her modest nurse's salary had grown into something extraordinary. By the time Debbie and Carl were stealing her silverware, Margaret was worth over $9 million. And now she knew exactly who wouldn't be getting a dime. She rewrote her will, $1 each to Debbie and Carl, everything else to her church. And she lived the rest of her years with a secret smile. Several years later, Margaret passed away peacefully in her sleep. The church was packed for her funeral. Neighbors, friends, people she'd helped in her nursing days. And in the back pew, Debbie and Carl sat and black, whispering to each other with smug little smiles. They were already imagining new cars, maybe a bigger house. After all, they'd practically earned it, right? Then, the will was read. To my beloved niece and nephew, Debbie and Carl, I leave $1 each. May it remind you that love is worth more than silver or crystal. The lawyer paused. Debbie's face turned pale. Carl's jaw dropped. The remainder of my estate, valued at approximately $9 million, shall go to the First Community Church. The room fell silent, except for the muffled snickers of neighbors who knew exactly why. Debbie screamed, "There must be a mistake!" Carl threatened to sue. But the will was ironclad. Their greed had cost them millions, and the church used the money to build a community health clinic. Margaret's final act of kindness. Justice served cold. Karma has a funny way of showing up when you least expect it. Margaret never yelled, never fought, never demanded revenge. She simply let her life and her will speak for her. And in the end, the people who treated her like she was already gone ended up with exactly what they deserved. If that story gave you chills, hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life tales of karma and revenge. And tell me in the comments, what's the most satisfying act of justice you've ever seen? Maybe your story will be featured next.